This is your World War III update. Here's what's going on. So, we're in the greenhouse today, and we got some green news for you. For the first time in a long time, it appears as though progress is being made at easing hostilities on every World War III front. But there's a catch. Now, I'm going to give you the good news. Then I'm going to give you the bad news, as a good actuarial scatologist like myself would. If you don't know what that is, that's somebody who studies the fecal matter hitting the oscillating device and gives you an in-depth analysis so that you can be better prepared to deal with the cleanup. Now, here's what's going down. It appears as though China and the United States have made some progress on trade talks. Ukraine and Russia are making progress on ceasefire talks. It appears as though the Iranian progress on their nuclear enrichment program is in terms of ceasing or coming to some sort of agreement with the United States. It appears as though that is progressing. It appears as though Pakistan and India have started to ease hostilities as well. Even the Gaza Strip has agreed to release a prisoner in exchange for more humanitarian aid. So suddenly, it's as if we just stepped into a whole other dimension than we were in on Friday, when Pakistan and India were literally on the cusp of nuclear war. Okay, they were meeting with their actual nuclear commanders to discuss strategy on essentially what the next step of escalation would be. And now we know that there was in fact a U.S. nuclear plane in the air, and it appears as though a Pakistani airbase that was home to nuclear missiles may have actually been struck. So indeed, these things were happening on a strategic level, or they're quickly approaching that. Last week, of course, we had the cancellation of talks with the Iranians. It appears as though that is now back on today. It appeared that the Chinese-US trade war was at an impasse, and now there's some prospect that in fact a deal may have been struck, although the Chinese are saying that that's an overstatement, and it's really just a framework for how negotiations are going to be conducted that was agreed to. In terms of Ukraine and Russia, some people are saying that Vladimir Putin is going to be meeting with Zelensky on Thursday in Istanbul. I can almost tell you with 100% certainty that that is absolute nonsense. But after the European leaders went to go and see Zelensky on just over the weekend here, it appeared as though they're now starting to talk about the troop deployments into Ukraine once again. And Trump is making some backhanded compliments towards Vladimir Putin. But this is, I would say, as close as we've ever been to actually having Vladimir Putin and Zelensky considering meeting and reinitiating the Istanbul talks that concluded prematurely in 2022. So we're seeing this bullish news on every possible front. Now, I got to say, though, what you'll notice is that, and what I found in recent history, is that every time we get a little bit of good news like this, it is quickly followed by really, really bad news to the downside. You know what I mean? It's like these wild undulations. Like, you know, all of a sudden there's B-2 bombers at Diego Garcia, and Iranian talks have failed, and Pakistan and India start going at it, and Russia and Ukraine, 550 drones, and China is not talking to the United States, and then all of a sudden, you know, we get some easement, and then everything starts to reverse. But every time it does that, the wave gets bigger and bigger. So, and the risk of all of this is that because the U.S. negotiators are flying by the seat of their pants, they really have no plan. Because of that, we could have these brief moments of reprieve. And as I indicated in my previous video, you're going to see the greenest of green days in the run-up to the first use of a nuclear weapon. Because, of course, there's going to be a lot of overpromising, a lot of overstating of what has happened in terms of negotiations, and just a exuberance for any positive news, which is going to be overreacted to in the markets. The markets are just looking for an excuse to rally right now. Any old excuse, even if it means going back to 50% tariffs with China, which of course is what tanked the markets in the first place. The markets will take that and they'll probably run with it. The problem is the uncertainty. Nobody trusts anybody anymore. And the real catch to all of these peace talks is that the West has had its ass handed to it on every possible front. It lost against the Houthis. It lost against Russia. It's losing against China in the trade war, regardless of what all the mega propagandists will say. China is winning the trade war. They basically didn't say anything. Trump is having a monologue with himself and comes to this agreement with himself about maybe it's going to be 80, maybe it's going to be 34. You haven't heard anything out of China or the Chinese embassy with respect to these talks until we actually had some talks happen at the Geneva, at a convention in Geneva with the United States and China. And so pretty much on every possible front, you're seeing this. But what this means, and even in Pakistan, where the Chinese jets were able to defeat some Western jets and presumably Western intelligence, it appears as though the Chinese are winning over the Pakistanis. That's the tug of war that's happening there. It's a war for influence between Pakistan, between China and the United States. Now, while it's good that we have temporary peace, you must understand what that means, right? This means that the U.S. is actually going to see the collapse of its credibility in the minds of all of its allies and proxies around the world. If it abandons Ukraine, if it abandons Taiwan, if it abandons India or Pakistan, because it's playing both sides of that fence, if it abandons Israel, if it abandons any one of the Middle Eastern countries right now, it runs the risk of losing its credibility, and all of those nation states are going to correspondingly, rapidly mobilize, okay? And what you're going to see is a strategic sedition of sorts, where you have countries who are on the rise, revisionist countries are going to try to usurp that power vacuum that exists. And so you're no longer going to have a situation, if the United States can defeat the Houthis, and that's the greatest example of what we're talking about here, if they can't defeat the Russians, then how are they going to be able to enforce the petrodollar or the SWIFT banking system or any type of institutional transatlantic hegemony? How are they going to be able to sell that to the world and the US dollar as an economic safe haven? Well, they're not, okay? So all of that relies and presumes that the US is the preeminent global military power. When they cease to be that, this is probably what you're going to see. Capitulation on every front, but it's going to be branded as victory and success. So when Zelensky eventually, if he eventually folds to Russia, that's going to be chalked up to be a win by the Trump administration. If Iran is able to get sanctions removed, continue with its nuclear enrichment, and reinstate some type of JCPOA type agreement, then Trump is going to chalk that up as a win. However, anybody who's paying close attention will understand that that's very much a defeat as far as his administration's initial goals actually were. On the Chinese front, of course, making concessions on tariffs because he has all of the big corporations, the Walmarts, the Costcos saying, hey, we only have a certain amount of inventory left, things are going to get down to the wire, and shit's going to start hitting the fan soon, so you need to make a deal, right? So this is just something to bear in mind, that even if all the news we're hearing is true, it's actually really bad for the global U.S. Pax Americana. It's bad news for that, which is probably good news for the rest of the world, maybe, at least in the long run. But in the short term, it's going to actually mean more chaos. So sorry to convolute things, but this is how you really have to analyze the situation. Now, in terms of the good news, we do have, it appears that we're closer to some sort of communication around a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine than we've ever been since the start of the conflict, believe it or not. And this is all while the Russians start to grease the wheels for another Rezhnik demonstration, which is going to be happening in a week or so. Now, I suspect that all of this is probably going to go nowhere, to be brutally honest, because just the way that Russia is playing this diplomatically, they're using a lot of interesting language. The Ukrainians are using interesting language, saying that we agree to a ceasefire with no conditions as of tomorrow with XYZ conditions. So it seems it's probably going to fail, but you just never know. Now, there were people going as far, prominent influencers, OSINT analysts, aggregators, who were going so far as to repost information that claimed that Putin was going to go to Turkey on Thursday to meet with Zelensky. And I'm calling BS on that. First of all, I mean, that is so many steps ahead. When you look at the standard protocol that the Russian diplomats typically follow, I mean, you're talking months before something that's likely going to happen. And to do it in a NATO country is very unlikely. The security detail that Putin would want to ensure before going to a place like that would probably take weeks, if not months, in order to make arrangements for. So I'm highly doubtful of that. And this is what I mean in that you always have this overshoot and it just creates wild undulations in either direction. And it can all end very badly if there is no plan once you finally meet that person face to face. So both want an immediate ceasefire, same old rhetoric. Trump has made some interesting statements with respect to this, which I found to be backhanded and provocative. Here's what he said. Now, you tell me, would you say something like this? If you were trying to get a deal between Russia and Ukraine for the longest time, why would you inject this into the discourse when you knew it was likely going to be met with contempt by the Russians? Now, here's what he said. President Putin of Russia doesn't want to have a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine, but rather wants to meet on Thursday in Turkey. What? Now, Putin doesn't want to meet, and I think this is what people derive that from. Putin's going to send some negotiators. He's not going to go there himself. That's never going to happen. Turkey has nuclear weapons. They have one of the biggest militaries, and duplicitous Erdogan, as much as he might be a broker of potential peace between Ukraine and Russia, and as much as they might do business with pipelines and whatnot, I don't think that the Russians are going to trust them for a second, okay? To negotiate a possible end to the bloodbath, Ukraine should agree to this immediately. At least they will be able to determine whether or not a deal is possible. And if it is not, European leaders and the U.S., we will then know where everything stands, and then we can proceed accordingly. I'm starting to doubt that Ukraine will make a deal with Putin, who's too busy celebrating the victory of World War II, which could not have been won, not even close, without the United States of America. Let's have a meeting now. Why would you throw that last part in? Like, what purpose could that possibly serve? How is that conducive towards constructive talks? It just isn't. So, and this is the other problem. The closer we get to peace, the closer all of those extremists on all sides are going to want to throw a wrench into the plan. They're going to do something, some false flag. They're going to do something in order to derail the talks. So case in point, with respect to the Houthis and the Americans, the Israelis, at the time of making this video, are currently bombing Yemeni ports. Okay? And, of course, we all know what's going on there, but essentially what they're going to do is they're going to provoke the Yemenis, and then, the Yemenis are going to respond. They're going to start firing on ships, and then once Trump's trip that is coming up is over, that's when they're going to recommence the campaign. Mark my words. I'm pretty sure about that one. Okay, I'm pretty optimistic about everything else. But let's just read the room with respect to what's going on at Diego Garcia, Iran, and in the Middle East. So the B-2 bombers have returned to Whitman Air Force Base. That is true. They've been replaced with B-52 bombers. Again, I think this is just strategic posturing in order to the reverse of strategic posturing, because Trump's going there, so he wants to ease hostilities. While he's there, they don't want shit to flare up. They want to create the illusion that there's some prospect towards peace. But my gut is telling me that this is all just a show, all right? We have Palestinian state comments, which the press secretary, Catherine Leavitt, walked back immediately. This whole supposed acrimony between Trump and Netanyahu, I think, is something which is being grossly overstated by a lot of the alternative media. Some people are saying that Netanyahu is trying to sabotage and that Trump doesn't like Netanyahu and that they're diverging in different ways and that Mike Waltz was somehow spying for Netanyahu, and all kinds of rumor, hearsay, and conjecture, which appear all to be in line with the path to Persia strategy of trying to subvert Iran. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go and watch our video with Brian Berletic, where they explain in detail how they're going to create a false enmity between Israel and the United States, the good cop, bad cop, in order to try to either get regime change in Iran or in the run-up to justify attacks on the Iranians, okay? So we have the Trump trip coming up. We have an Iranian minister, foreign minister, saying that the main goal of negotiations with Washington is to lift sanctions. And fortunately, an agreement has been reached on this. Now, that's incredibly surprising today. I think we got to listen to the wording there. So he says the main goal of negotiations, this is the Iranian foreign minister, the main goal with Washington is to lift sanctions. And fortunately, an agreement has been reached on this. So did Washington agree that lifting sanctions was going to be part of the talk? Not they're going to agree to lift sanctions, because of course that would require Congress for the majority of the sanctions that actually matter. And there's so much, I don't know what the terminology is, but Islamophobia, Persiaphobia in the White House that I highly doubt that, Congress is going to lift any of those sanctions anytime soon. So again, I think they're just stringing the Iranians along until Trump's trip is concluded. He's got some big news, apparently. Is it going to be Abraham's Accord related? Maybe it's going to be related to Iran. I highly doubt it. This whole Palestinian state thing, that's not going to happen. I mean, just look at what Trump was saying a few weeks ago, I should say, with respect to the ethnically cleansing of Gaza to, build resorts and things of that nature. So it's likely all for show. Trump said yesterday during an interview with a talk host, Hugh Hewitt, there are only two alternatives: blow them up nicely or blow them up viciously. So in reference, of course, to the Iranian nuclear enrichment program. So this is what I mean, guys. Like, I want to be optimistic. Okay, some people say, oh, you just want bad things to happen because it's good for business. Number one, I don't even like the prepping business. There was a time when the novelty of having a store and being able to bring in the new gear, now it's kind of just a headache because, I don't want to be in a situation where bad news is what, increases my bottom line. I don't like that. At the same time, if you look at any insurance company, because that's all prepping is insurance, insurance companies benefit when there is a certain amount of disaster, right? When there's like a manageable amount of disaster, enough to motivate people to want insurance, right? But it can also go too far. There can be too much disaster. And now I'm looking at my kids and the reality of the fact that, when this stuff all starts to flare up, they're going to be draft age. And what sort of dystopian authoritarian nightmare are they going to be entering? So I'm actually hoping that the way we call attention to this stuff, and sound the alerts and the warning videos. I actually hope that that is having the effect of bringing awareness to it and derailing the zeitgeist towards that. You know what I mean? So what I'm saying is sometimes in just talking about bad things happening, you can actually prevent bad things happening because it gets through to the appropriate channels. And, you know, if nobody is talking about it, like I often wonder, if there was no social media, would we already have seen a nuclear strike? Is it social media circulating this information and making the public aware of it that is actually forcing politicians and decision makers to exercise more restraint or to be more receptive to that feedback? You know what I'm saying? So I hope we get a break. And either way, what you want right now, you want 5 years. If we can get 5 years right now for somebody who is just starting, and again, reluctantly, cautiously optimistic when I say it, if we get 5 years, then that's enough time for you to do what you got to do. I can tell you right now, if you seriously want to ride out what could be coming, it's going to take you many years to prepare. This is not something you can just put on your credit card, okay? This is the work, the labor itself. Like building this greenhouse was a many-month endeavor. Probably didn't have to be, but I'm doing so much research for these daily updates. It's occupying a lot of my time. But just, you know, building the greenhouse, building the garden beds, bringing in the dirt, bringing in the plants, just everything that goes along with that, getting the soil correct, and just fine-tuning everything. And that's just one part of a homestead. That doesn't even get into the animal husbandry component, which we're going to be getting into, and the renewable energy and the water, you know, the well and the orchard, and, you know, just this and this and this. To do all that stuff, it's going to take you a long time. So you should hope. So this is not a time to celebrate and go on vacation. I have a buddy today who's saying, yeah, maybe it's time that I, you know, sell a few gold bars and go on a trip to wherever in the Caribbean. And hey, you know, I hope so. I really do hope so. But again, I think these are opportunities. You should take these as opportunities to buy the dips. And I'm talking about preparedness-wise, buy the dips. Because the amount of work you're going to have to do, to build out a self-sustaining lifestyle is something that you can't even put a price tag on it. And this is what I'm starting to realize when I survey properties now. I find myself just, you know, in my downtime looking at properties, even though I'm perfectly content where I am, and this is probably where I'm going to stay for a long time. I just find myself going and looking to see what the market is. And the thing I'm looking for now is the thing that very few people pay attention to. I'm not even looking at the house for the most part. I'm looking for the access. I'm looking for the roads. I'm looking at the topography. I'm looking at the outbuildings. I'm looking at how much work has been done infrastructurally around the property, because that's where a lot of the work and labor goes that nobody sees, and we just take that for granted, that it took them, you know, several weeks to build that road, or, you know, just things like that. Is it fenced? You know, things of that nature. But we're going to do some more in-depth videos on strategic relocation soon, and kind of getting into, you know, looking at different properties and seeing what might be ideal, and only if for fantasy purposes, just to help people, you know, making more informed decisions. So anyways, okay, so we got Pakistan, India. That situation was about to hit the fan on Friday, and suddenly it's just resolved. I don't think it's resolved as of yet. However, we do have some positive news on that front. India has opened multiple gates of the hydropower dam on the Chenab River today, which of course was a major point of contention between the two. Pakistan needs that water, and I presume that India has to open the dam at some point. It's not, unless they can reroute it somewhere else into their territory. Otherwise, they're going to have flooding on their territory. So I don't even know, actually. I just kind of got a glimpse of this story. This could actually be bearish. So I don't know what the relationship there is. Obviously, it's for hydroelectric power, so they have to, release water. Occasionally, India has massive energy demands, massive population, and water is incredibly scarce in that country, in those two countries. So we also had a U.S. nuclear emergency aircraft. The B-350 AMS was reportedly spotted over Pakistan, okay? And apparently there was a nuclear weapons facility that may have been struck by India. Now, the Indian propaganda was off the charts, and it's hard to say, who was really telling the truth, but I think one of the dead giveaways was the fact that India banned 8,000 major influencer accounts. I think you only do that if you're worried that your narrative is crumbling, okay? So it looks that Pakistan caught India off guard, and despite having inferior technology, not entirely, but along certain dimensions, despite having a much smaller population and lower GDP, they were able to use their tools, Moneyball style, and they were able to, catch the Indians off guard. So there is a U.S.-China dynamic there as well. Of course, the USA is trying to pull the Pakistanis away from China. The Pakistanis fly both F-16s and Chinese J-17s, which is weird unto itself. So there's a bit of a tug-of-war power struggle going on there. It appears as though the situation has been somewhat ameliorated. However, there is still skirmishes along the line of contact. As per the time of making this video, these are small scale, and I would not doubt that these hostilities don't flare up again because, of course, the underlying issue has far from been resolved. Now, in terms of the China trade deal, I don't think it will matter, even if they do get a deal, because the damage has already been done. Very few people are going to want to invest now in an environment when things can be so swiftly overturned. And despite what Trump is saying with this unilateral word salad that the White House has issued when they're saying that a deal has been struck, and there's going to be either a lot of people looking really foolish tomorrow, or there's going to be a lot of people eating their words tomorrow. I'm not one of these people who just wants to see Trump fail. I have no interest in that whatsoever. I want to see a deal with China and the United States, but I also think that there is a very high likelihood that it's being exaggerated. And it appears as though a Wall Street executive with ties to the White House is saying that tomorrow's trade announcement between the US and China is not at the UK level in terms of a rough framework, as per Fox Business Gasparino. So that it's going to be, I think what the Chinese called it, I can't remember, some sort of framework for negotiations as opposed to an actual deal, okay? So, hey, we're going to take what we can get at this point in time, and I got to get to work. I got to fill up some 1,000-liter totes because we're quickly finding ourselves on the brink of another drought here, unfortunately. So I got a lot of trees that I got to go and water. I got to move a lot of dirt. I got to move more dirt buckets in here. Got to dig some soil. What else do I got to do? I got to do some weeding in the I just got tons of shit to do. And that's what I'm saying, man. The amount of work for this lifestyle is just incredible. So be ready for that. Anyways, guys, I hope things improve. I'll keep you posted if they do. We'll probably drop another blue strip video in the next few hours, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.